There are certain things that painters don't think that they can address or paint, especially really contemporary things. You need a language to be able to get in there to look at it. What I saw is if you look at those housing estates, the eaves and the windowsills and stuff like that have this lovely kind of rhythm. The subject matter is almost incidental. It's a way of discovering what paint can do. I think there's something there, and I'm glad that Jackson's Prize thought so too. I'm Andrew Torr. I'm a painter living and working in South West London, and I was lucky enough to win Jackson's Art Prize 2024. I have three favourite subjects that I'm working on at the moment. The first one is a series of paintings which are nocturnes around the commons and kind of open spaces of London. The light pollution's obviously horrific. It's that kind of yellow sodium light, the old school lights. You get those kind of white LED lights, and then there's so much building work, you get the red as well. So you get this incredible kind of colorscape above your head. That then led on to the Thames paintings. I don't know if you've ever tried to paint water, but it keeps moving. It's just, it is tough. The surface is one thing, but actually its undulations and its movement are made by these things. Big old forces coming in, whether it's the tide or whether it's the wind or whatever it is. Sometimes it's more successful than other times, but that's painting. The third is the estates. I have always been interested in the housing estates that now sort of form a major part of the subject matter of the things I paint about. That landscape, which is so kind of ubiquitous around the UK, as a subject matter, it says something political about the UK at the moment and about the world in some kind of sideways way. I don't say that as a tourist. I was born on a housing estate like that, and like I say, my parents live there. I mean, people that have seen the paintings that I'm making at the moment kind of talk about a nostalgia and then talk about a melancholy kind of air about these things, and I get that. There is something a little unlovely about those places. The painting that won Jackson's Art Prize this year, Estate, works on the same level. I still go and do recce's around there and try and find the perfect place to do. I'll take hundreds of photographs and sketch around the estates. What I don't want to do with any of these is paint scenes of things. The primary thing is that they're kind of paintings about paint. It can be so unmanageable sometimes. It does stuff that you don't want it to do. And I don't think there's any reason why anybody should use paint. Or, painting's not necessarily the thing. It's not better or worse than anything else. It's just a language. It's a language that I really like. It's a way of discovering what paint can do. And paint has a relationship to the subject matter, but you want that balance between the thing described or depicted and how you depict it and what processes you use. You want to find that nice balance between the two, and I think there's something there. They are, I think, English paintings. The St George Cross in that painting is something I made. I think it's important because they're all over the place. So I think there's something about that kind of patriotism that is connected to issues with immigration at the moment and stuff like. I don't want to kind of over-egg it. A big shift has happened in those places, particularly in that estate, is that I know that they've all gone and voted Conservative for the first time in their history. That's a big shift, and I think something's happening in there. And I'm not saying that my paintings carry any of that information, but it's just, I think that aesthetic, that vernacular architecture, carries all that stuff with it at the moment. I don't want people to think that I'm looking back on it in any kind of negative way at all. The thing's there, and that's interesting. Most of the population of the UK live in places like that now, and there is a certain underrepresentation of that place. It's not the driver for me painting those things, but it's why shouldn't people paint those and make them a worthy subject matter for painting? I genuinely get drawn, whether I like it or not, to the full-on earth colours like sap green, burnt umber, the warm cadmiums for red and yellow, almost like a classic colour palette. There's no one way to begin work on a painting. I'd like to work on an incredibly smooth surface. I will gesso the hell out of linen. I could do like 10 coats of gesso, sanding between and all that sort of stuff. When the canvas is like cartridge paper, that's when I really like it. What you didn't know when you gave me Jackson's Art Prize was that the painting is on a Jackson stretcher, which is and they're brilliant. If I think it wants a ground, I do that. I will often work from a series of photographs, and it might be a kind of patchwork of different photographs that give you different perspective. I'm not bad with Photoshop, which I think might send a lot of painters screaming, like, kind of, how dare you? But it's another tool. I kind of layer it so that I can work out how that rhythm might work across there. What it reminds me of is I was a big fan of that kind of 90s guitar music, and so like there was this aesthetic of being loud, quiet, loud. That push and pull between those two things, I think, is really similar to the way that it works in painting. You get a really lovely, crisp edge. And I'll work with masking tape to get that edge as well, like a lot of painters now. I will also cut out stencils. The paint's working on its own terms. You get a nice music with that. You get a nice, I don't know what that is, but it's a kind of wordless, it's difficult to describe. It's just the thing that makes you think, yeah. My interest in art and painting started when I was very young. I basically spent all my time in the art room. Then I went from secondary school to do a degree at Wimbledon. I got a studio in the East End in Cable Street. Like a lot of people who paint, I had to have a secondary job. And I was working at a restaurant, and I had an accident in the restaurant, and I managed to nearly lose my hand. Cut all the tendons to my fingers and the artery and all the nerves. And it was really, really grim. I was basically out of action for 3 years with follow-up operations and stuff like that. Lost the studio and wasn't entirely sure what I was going to do. Started a job at London Marathon, and I continued to paint through that time, but obviously it took a back seat. I left London Marathon 6 years ago, and because I was in a position then to go back to painting full time, and that's what I do. After my accident, I definitely made a conscious decision to work in particularly oil paint. So I get up at 7:30 every morning. My wife's a teacher, and she has to be up and out and get off to work. And I get up at 7:30 every morning to make her a coffee before she goes out. And that is my way of getting myself up and out of the pit and painting. And I definitely give this advice to anybody who is thinking of a career in painting, is you need to be in the studio whether you want to be there or not. Sometimes I'm not sure what I'm going to work on. There's that thing where you're not entirely sure what your starting point is, but get in the studio and get working, because something will come out of it. I think it's wholly intuitive when you know when a painting's finished, and I think that's true of anybody who really knows what they're doing. I mean, I wouldn't be so disingenuous as to say that I don't know what it's going to turn out like. I mean, I've got a subject matter, and so I kind of know that's going to be involved in there, and I have an idea of the way colours will work through experience and whatever. But if you know what the end product is going to be, there's kind of no point in doing it. You're just going through the motions. You want to surprise yourself. You can end up not sure whether what you've done is right. You don't see it objectively in a way that you see other people's paintings, and I don't know why that happens. And that's the worst one. You get to a point where it's doing things that you find uncomfortable. Now you can either think, well, I better rectify that and make it like what painting should be, or you could, what I do is I turn them to the wall in the studio and let them fester for a week or so, and then look at them again. And I can often think, what were you thinking? Like this, and then I carry on working at it. But you can go back to them and think, oh, blimey, that's interesting. That's really interesting, because something different's happening. When I found out that I'd won Jackson's Art Prize, I was told that I'd won, and I genuinely couldn't speak for 4 or 5 seconds, which is a long, long time on a phone call. I couldn't find words. It was such a fabulous surprise. The quality of artists and the work that Jackson's Prize attracts year on year is always really, really high. Genuinely won't forget that phone call, because it was so weird. It was not that I was trying to search for words. I kind of just lost it a little bit, which was great. What I would also say to people, especially if they're just starting out, is don't worry about rejection. There is such an element of chance involved in these things. And I don't mean that the judges will choose something on a whim. I think that genuinely there are days when a judge will choose a painting over another painting because of what's happened to them, because of the light in the room, because of all sorts of factors. And it doesn't, in lots of ways, reflect on the quality of what you're doing, that you might not get selected at all. If you're confident in your work, and you should be, if you're not, genuinely, you shouldn't be doing it. You have to have some confidence in what you're doing and how it stacks up against what painting is. I am really looking forward to being a guest judge for next year's Jackson's Art Prize, because it's such a broad church, yet the quality is still great by the time you get down to the shortlist. I should imagine it's really, really difficult to slip a cigarette paper between 2 paintings that you really like, or even 5 paintings that you really like. The estate paintings being such a new and kind of novel thing to work on are still really fruitful. Why would anybody paint the unlovely estates of rural and semi-rural England and try and find something beautiful in those lines and those little marks? And a really good side effect of it is that the subject matter is unusual. And, it's not unusual because it's incredibly common, but it's like, oh, you're painting those. So it's kind of easy in a way. I'm fine just to work on the paintings that I'm working on at the moment and see what happens.